Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the GLOBE webinar series on the future of global governance. I'm Carrie Otterburn of the Leuven Center for Global Governance Studies, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Today, we are joined by Professor Juan Díez Medrano to discuss his new book, Europe in Love, Binational Couples and Cosmopolitan Society, published this year by Routledge. Juan is Professor of Sociology at the University of Carlos III of Madrid and Research Fellow at Institut Barcelona de Estudis Internacionals. The focus of his research is the study of nationalism and European integration, and his most recent work has looked into the consequences of knowing foreign languages, on theories of secessionism as they relate to Brexit, and on European identification and solidarity. Aside from the book that we will be discussing today, his other books include Divided Nations, published in 1995, and Framing Europe, published in 2003. Also joining us today as discussant is Professor Dr. Céline Teney. Céline is Professor for Fundamentals of Social Sciences at the Institute of Sociology at the University of Göttingen. Her research focuses on sociology of European Union, of immigration, and political sociology. In 2019, she published an article in Innovation, the European Journal of Social Science Research, titled Immigration of Highly Skilled European Professionals to Germany, Intra-EU Brain Gain or Brain Circulation, that is on a topic related to today's webinar and is available open access for any of you who might be interested. I'll pop the link in the chat box and you can read that if you are interested in that. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation by Juan of about 25 minutes, and then Céline will start off the discussion by offering her reflections and asking some questions, and Juan will have an opportunity to respond. Then we'll turn to questions from you, the audience. Feel free to send questions to me throughout the webinar by using the webinar chat box function on the side of the webinar window, and I will collect your questions to share with the speakers following the presentations. Before we begin, just a few words about the GLOBE project. Funded by the European Commission's Horizon 2020 program, GLOBE seeks to understand the constraints and opportunities for the European Union in promoting its interests and values through global governance, with specific attention to four key areas: trade and development, security and migration, climate change, and global finance. The 3.5-year project aims to identify the major roadblocks to effective and coherent global governance by multiple stakeholders in a multipolar world, as well as to look ahead to 2030 and 2050 in order to equip policymakers with the tools they will need to deal with future challenges. On behalf of the GLOBE project, I would like to thank Juan and Céline for joining us today. And now it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Juan. You have the floor.
Good, thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you to the Leuven Center for Global Governance for inviting me. And thanks Céline for agreeing to be a discussant. And thanks to all the participants who are out there on the cloud listen to what I'm going to say. Yes, I'm going to introduce my book, Europe in Love, to the audience. And before I enter into the actual contents of the book, I would like to make some preliminary remarks. International mobility under globalization has led to a dramatic increase in international couples around the world, especially, in the countries that have received much of this migration. Both international mobility and binational marriages are breaking through national barriers and propitiating greater international communication, practical transnational expertise, and the emergence of transnational and supranational identifications. In a nutshell, they express and contribute to the emergence of a cosmopolitan society. Of course, binational marriages are just one among many factors that simultaneously contribute to the emergence of this cosmopolitan society. International mobility, as I mentioned, but also the internet, greater average levels of education in the population, and the emergence of supranational forms of governance are certainly contributing to this transition as well. Another comment I would like to make before I enter into the contents of the book is that I don't see that cosmopolitan society is around the corner. And we will certainly not be witness to it in our lifetimes. Just think that nations, which we now take for granted, but in fact are no more than 150 years old, were more than 600 years in the making. while internal trade and the printing press played a key role in their emergence, their impact spread over generations. Anybody writing around the 1440s about the effect that the printing press was going to have on the emergence of nations would be taken for a fool or a crazy person. But as sociologists, I think we are entitled to look at long-term processes as much as to short-term ones. Although I speculate that the transition to a cosmopolitan society will be shorter than that which led to nations, I do not think it is for tomorrow or after tomorrow. Still, with Karl Marx, I believe that unless an economic system that does not require international markets and international mobility is invented, the process toward a cosmopolitan society is inevitable. Finally, when I say that the transition to a cosmopolitan society is underway and more or less inevitable, I am not arguing that this transition will necessarily and simultaneously lead us to a cosmopolitan polity, as revealed by some of my book's findings. The transition to a cosmopolitan polity, if and when it takes place, will mainly result from other factors, and I don't see a cosmopolitan society as being the main one. Here, in light of contemporary research on nationalism, I depart from Karl Marx's and Ulrich Beck's vision for that matter. If anything, national polities and politics are today's main obstacle on the road to a cosmopolitan society. Europe in Love focuses on binational couples between Europeans, because it is in Europe where this process is more advanced. It draws on surveys to random samples of individuals in national and binational couples in 7 cities: Madrid, Barcelona, Antwerp, Brussels, The Hague, Amsterdam, and Zurich. The binational couples of which I will be talking about are binational couples formed by a national of the country of residence and a foreign partner coming from another European country in these couples. This is because statistically speaking, the percentage of binational couples living in a third country, that is in a country which is not the country of nationality of any of the partners, is really a very small proportion of binational couples. The very, very large majority of binational couples reside in one of the partners' country of nationality. The book focuses on structural individual level contrasts between partners in binational couples and partners in national couples. This is because, the focus on on the structural variables or structural contrasts is because the theoretical question that the book addresses relate to the general literatures on globalization, cosmopolitanism, and transnationalism. That is, I'm in dialogue with the work of people like Adrian Favell, Ettore Recchi, or Neil Flickstein, among many others. The book, therefore, does not touch on the interactional and intimate dynamics of family life in those couples. And I would accept that this type of discussion probably is the type of discussion that would have made of this book a bestseller, no doubt. But I leave it up for others to explore these issues in future research. Europe in Love descriptively shows that partners in binational couples are more cosmopolitan than partners in national ones, in their practices, in their interests, in their taste, and in terms of identification. They thus contribute to a gradual division within national societies between a cosmopolitan and a national segment. This contribution is reinforced by other structural features that distinguish binational from national couples. For instance, relatively more work-centered social networks, greater reliance, greater self-reliance when confronting everyday problems, and specific disadvantages in the labor market for foreign partners from poorer European countries in these couples. The binational couples' more cosmopolitan lives and outlook are undoubtedly due to self-selection processes. Education, knowledge of foreign languages, and travel abroad during adolescence makes it more likely that individuals will get together with individuals from other European countries. At the same time, the book shows that there's some causal effect of being in a binational couple in the development of a cosmopolitan life and outlook. For instance, being in a binational couple constrains the partners to travel more often to other countries to visit friends and relatives in a fairly cyclical way, like every summer or every Christmas vacation. At the same time, it exposes the partners to and motivates them to like each other's national cultures, as I show, for instance, when discussing taste for particular national cuisines. Finally, and I think this is very important, being in a binational couple fosters greater awareness of being European. Interestingly, while partners in binational couples are more European in outlook, they identify as much as their national counterparts with the country of nationality. In a way, European awareness or European identification is just a complement that adds up to our national identification. But national identification remains primary in these couples. This finding justifies my claim that I do not see the emergence of a cosmopolitan society as leading or strongly contributing to the emergence of a cosmopolitan polity. If this doesn't happen in Europe, where supranational governance institutions are much more developed than anywhere else in the world, then chances are the chances that a transition from cosmopolitan society to cosmopolitan polity will be simultaneous are quite negligible. One of the book's main contributions, I believe, is to show that the transition to a cosmopolitan society and the division of national societies into cosmopolitan and national segments is not only a middle-class phenomenon. International migration and binational couples are also contributing to similar processes taking place among the lower classes. Members of the lower classes who marry or cohabit with a foreign European from other countries also express greater openness to other cultures, and their lives and their outlook by virtue of being in a binational couple also become more cosmopolitan. Having said that, lower class binational couples differ from middle class ones. For both structural and socialization reasons, they are certainly less cosmopolitan to begin with. In addition to this, the specific social and migration context that makes these lower class binational couples, the fact that the foreign partner is often a European migrant whose family also lives in the country where he or she lives, means that the lives of lower class binational couples and their outlook somewhat differ from those of middle class binational couples. First of all, the male foreign partners in particular, especially if they come from poorer European countries, face greater hurdles in the job market than do middle-class foreign nationals in these binational couples. On the other hand, the availability for these lower-class binational couples of a more extended family network in the country provides lower-class binational couples with greater access to assistance when confronting everyday problems or chores than is available to foreign partners in middle-class binational couples. The presence of family in the host country, which I think is a very important distinctive factor for these couples, also leads foreign partners in these lower class binational couples to develop greater identification both with the country of residence and the city of residence than we find among middle class foreign partners. Finally, lower class foreign partners from poor European countries tend to develop a greater sense of social achievement than do middle class ones. I speculate in the book, although I really haven't found real empirical support for this, is that this greater sense of social achievement in the results from the fact that the country where they now reside offers them better collective goods than does their country of origin. Middle-class foreign partners in binational couples usually come from a relatively rich country, and they experience the disadvantages they face in the host country as a move down on the social scale. For foreign partners in binational couples who come from poor countries or who are poor themselves, on the other hand, the move to a wealthier country, even if they face hurdles in the labor market, is experienced as a move up. And it gives them a greater sense of social achievement. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, Europe in Love is written in dialogue with the literature on transnationalism and cosmopolitanism. In a way, it confirms, it modulates, and it questions some of its claims. For those who are familiar with the literature, I would emphasize that, for instance, the book challenges the idea conveyed by Hans-Peter Krisi, Neil Flickstein, or Teresa Kuhn, that there is a neat overlap between the material economic winners and losers from globalization and cosmopolitans versus nationals. This book shows that though the two axes correlate, the cosmopolitan national distinction cuts across class lines and the winning-losing dichotomy. Europe in Love also confirms at the same time and modulates some of Favel's inferences in his Eurostars and Eurocities book. In particular, and I think that's a very nice finding, it confirms that middle-class cosmopolitans face unique challenges when settling abroad. The comparison between middle-class and lower-class binational couples suggests, however, that the presence of family and co-nationals from the country of origin in the country of settlement can help surmount these challenges. Finally, the book confirms Mike Savage's claim that hypermobility does not necessarily lead to people's losing their sense of place. As conveyed by his concept of elective belonging, many of the foreign partners in my binational couples, especially those with lower class background, are perfectly well integrated in their host cities and strongly identify with their city of residence. Writing this book has been exciting and a learning journey. Before I end, I would like to thank my colleagues in the research project which produced the data that I analyzed in the book. In particular, to Helga de Valk, Leo van Wiesen, Jörg Rössel, and Teresa Castro. My thanks also go to the European Science Foundation, under whose auspices this project was conducted, and to the Belgian, Dutch, Swiss, and Spanish governmental research agencies which funded the project. Also, my thanks go to the University Carlos III de Madrid, the eBay in Barcelona, the Institut für Soziologie, the FU of Berlin, and the Collegforschungsgruppe, the transformative power of Europe, for their assistance while writing the book. Finally, my deep gratitude to Routledge for having agreed to publish the book and for producing it in its current form. And here I stop.
Thank you very much, Juan, for this very interesting presentation of your key findings in your book. And before we begin the Q&A, we'll pass the mic to Céline for her reflections and comments. And meanwhile, to the audience, just a quick reminder that you can send your questions in the chat function feature on the bottom of the webinar window. So please send those questions for the Q&A session. And over to you, Céline.
Thanks a lot. I prepared a very short PowerPoint, so I think it would be great if you could share my screen. Yeah. So I prepared my comments by thinking about 3 different points. So the first one is why I liked the book, then what is the main contribution of this book, according to me, to the sociology of the European Union, and then lastly, what is my take-home message by reading this book. So first of all, why I liked the book. So since I am working on also in the sociology of the European Union, I also do support strongly the European integration project, and it has been difficult in the last years to remain optimistic and enthusiastic with regard to the European Union, and because of the several crises that the European Union had to face, such as the Brexit, the rise of Eurosceptic political parties, and the increasing success in several European countries. Or, as you can see now, the fact that the European Union had to, or that the several member states had to close their borders because of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is quite difficult to remain optimistic about the future of the European Union and about this very great project. And so by reading the book of Juan, it was nice because it's a very positive side of the outcome of the European Union. So because the borders are open, it enables more people to fall in love with people from other countries. So it's very positive topic to deal with and to read about. So it's on my personal notes about why I really like to read the book. So it's very nice. Other sides of the current problems faced by the European Union, so very positive sides of the European Union. Now, a more scientific point of view now, with regard to the contribution of the book of Juan for the sociology of the European Union, and Juan told this already in his presentation of the book. I think this is the systematic comparison between highly educated foreigners living in binational couples and low educated foreigners living in binational couples. So most of the literature or the empirical studies in the sociology of the European Union focus on one of these two groups, and so that they fail to show the distinct profiles of these two groups. And Juan, in his book, managed to draw a very large picture of the integration in the receiving society, the social integration, social network, how they consume, whether they consume foreign goods or foreign music, for instance, how they are integrated on the labor market, how they are satisfied with their life, and so on. And I think it is very interesting to see that they show very distinct patterns of integration in the receiving society or in the destination country. And so it really shows the relevance of trying to compare more systematically different groups of European migrants, so and trying to broaden the range of European migrants we survey or we study in the sociology of the European Union. So now I'm coming to my third point, and so the third point was my main take-home message. So when I read his book, I thought about one of the main texts I give to my students in the sociology of the European Union that I think really show the importance or the relevance of the sociology of the European Union for those interested in European affairs. And so this is also a text of Juan from the book of Adrien Favel and Virginie Giraudon. It's about the rise of a European social class. So it's from 2011. And in this book chapter, he, by drawing on Karl Marx and Max Weber, he discussed the main element we need to be able to speak of European social class. So he said, one need to find Europeans with a strong European identity, with a strong or with strong trans-European ties, and who are willing and able to mobilize politically for the European Union. So I thought about these three elements and about the different results of Juan's book, and I thought about whether we could speak of these foreigners living in binational couples from his study, whether we could speak of them as composing the beginning of a European social class. Because these foreigners in binational couples have, of course, a very strong transnational, trans-European ties, since they have the most intimate relationship with someone from another European country. So this love relationship is the most intimate tie that one can think of. So they have a very strong ties with other European, with someone from another European country. By European identity, Juan also mentioned this in his summary of the book. Foreigners in binational couples do identify more strongly as European than nationals in national couples. However, he also suggests that this European identity is more like an awareness of being European rather than a very emotive identity. So here, he showed, for instance, that foreigners in binational couples who are happy in their relationship do not have stronger European identity than foreigners in binational couples who are not satisfied with their relationship. So there doesn't seem to have a link between this European identity and the fact that one might be happy in this in their love relationship with someone from another European country. Then the last point, the last element, European political mobilization. So there were not such items such as to which extent the foreigners in binational couples do mobilize politically for the European Union. So there are some items on political mobilization, but in general not specific to the European Union. But there are some items that one analyzed, such as interest in European politics, and he showed that foreigners in binational couples do have stronger interest in European politics than national couples. But there was also an item about the solidarity. So it was the question about whether the country should contribute to help another European country facing a natural catastrophe. And he showed that foreigners in binational couples do not show more solidarity towards other European countries than nationals in national couples. So this seems that these foreigners in binational couples are more interested in European politics, but this European solidarity is not something that they endorse to a larger extent. So based on this very brief analysis of these results in the light of this, the rise of a European social class, one can see that these trans-European social ties, they might be very strong because it's a very strong relationship that they have with other Europeans, but this does not seem to translate so far, at least so far, into a European social class with a political awareness. So as Juan also said, it's speak against the rise of a political cosmopolitan society, at least for this group that he studied here. And so this was my question to him, whether he could also discuss this finding in the light of his other texts on the European social class, or whether he would also agree with my brief interpretation of his results here. So thanks a lot for your book and this nice, the possibility to make these comments.
Thank you very much, Céline. I'm going to now pass back over to Juan, but also to remind the audience that you can send your questions to me in the chat box, and we'll get ready for the Q&A. Back to you, Juan.
Yes, thanks, Céline, for your very nice comments on the book, and I'm glad, especially coming from you, that that you liked it and that you found positive in it, since I really admire your own work, and that's why I'm so happy that you are commenting on it. You are indeed right in pointing towards a change in my perspective on the linkage between social cosmopolitanism and political cosmopolitanism, and with this idea that we are still far removed from witnessing the emergence of a politically conscious European class to which these binational couples would belong. And I have to say that when I wrote that first piece in Favela and Giraudon's research programmatic manifesto, that was the book where I published that piece, I was far more optimistic. In a way, there was a lot of voluntarism in my views of future trends in Europe that have been in a way frustrated by recent developments. I'm still convinced that the social transformation of Europe is taking place, but I am afraid that national polities are too strong, have too many resources at their disposal to retain the allegiance of their citizens. And in that sense, I'm much less optimistic than I was before about the simultaneity of these two processes. And I'll give you an illustration that does of this, which is not discussed in the book, regarding the politicization of these identities. The last European election saw for the first time the participation of a political group that was aimed at encompassing and representing the interest of this emerging, at least a European political class or middle class, which was the political party Volt. I don't know whether, probably most of you don't even know what that party is about. But that party, I had the opportunity to participate in meetings in Barcelona of the Barcelona branch of that party, and I saw lots of enthusiasm by people coming from many different nationalities who wanted to contribute to this party. The truth of the matter is that when the election came, very few national branches of this party were able to put a candidacy to the European Parliament because they didn't gather enough signatures. And secondly, the percentage of votes for the party was really ridiculously small. They got a deputy in Germany. I'm very happy that this happened. But in a way, the fact that most members of the middle class, including the more cosmopolitan segments of this class, voted for traditional national parties, showed or illustrates how far we are from this happening. Now, this shouldn't surprise us in the end in light of the literature of nationalism. Nations were largely constructions from above, even though there was some social material to build around, but they were a top-down process to a large extent. And that's why I said at the beginning that the transition to cosmopolitan polity will certainly be facilitated by the emergence of a cosmopolitan society, but many other factors should contribute to that. And we see this at the European Union. The European Union keeps on becoming stronger as a multi-level system of governance. But it's by no means because people are pushing in that direction. When financial institutions at the European Union level have become reinforced, it hasn't been because of popular pressure. When health competence and health and the ability to enforce cooperation agreements or reconstruction funds for the parties that the countries that have suffered more under the pandemic has come to happen, it hasn't been because people have been demonstrating on the streets so that the powers of the European Union get stronger. It's other processes, probably much more in the functionalist vein of what Ernst Haas discussed when talking about European integration than because of a bottom-up movement towards political integration. So in the end, I don't know whether in the end we'll see a cosmopolitan polity emerging, but certainly I think the two processes run different paths and they don't necessarily overlap. So.
Thank you very much. So we have a few questions in if we're ready to switch over to the Q&A, unless Céline, you wanted to respond again to.
Well, just a brief remark. Thanks for your reply on this your book chapter for 2011. So from what I've heard, it would be interesting to write another book, another manifesto of sociology of the European Union, and see 10 years later how things have changed and how far scholars are still enthusiastic and optimistic with regard to the rise of a European social class. So yes, just was a side remark. Thanks.
No, I just wanted to say that the frustration that perhaps I would express here is not very different than the frustration that Karl Marx had in the 19th century about the fact that its international workers in the end turned out to align themselves with the national states, despite the fact that it was in their interest to unite and as a class. So.
Thank you very much. So we have a bunch of questions in from the audience, so we can switch over to the audience Q&A now. So I'll start with a couple more like elementary, not elementary, like more basic questions, so that we can kind of set up the discussion, and then we can go on to some of the more specific questions. So we have one question from Monica Velasco, who's asking what you mean, how you define cosmopolitan society. And then we also have a question on your sample sizes from Katie Pickfance, who's wondering how many couples were interviewed and studied in the various countries for the project. So those two sort of setting the scene questions. And then maybe we can go into some of the more specific questions after that.
Okay. Regarding the first question, I in the book, in the introduction of the book, I settled for a fairly simple definition of cosmopolitanism around two dimensions. One is practical ease in moving across cultures or countries, and the second dimension would be to develop a certain awareness of belonging to communities that transcend the nation. So that would be my answer to the first question. Regarding the second question, I've forgotten a little bit the sample sizes, but I have the book here, but I mean we interviewed relatively large samples of about 600 people in each of the countries. It's funny that I don't remember. Let's see. Yes. Yeah, in total in my analysis, but the samples were larger. I just, for purposes of analysis, my comparisons center on purely national couples and purely binational ones. And basically, we had in total more than 1,800 individuals in our survey. So basically, most of the city samples were of the same size. And sorry if I don't remember the exact numbers, but in total, my analysis comprises 1,800 individuals distributed across national and binational couples. And our samples were in fact bigger. For my analysis, I eliminated from the analysis couples where it wasn't clear whether the couple is binational or national, simply because there are people who have double or triple nationalities. And in order to make the analysis more unambiguous, I centered on purely national couples, that is national couples where both partners have one and only nationality, and it's the nationality of the country, and binational couples where both partners are purely from two different nationalities. But as I said, the samples were fairly large. Actually, this is the only survey I know that includes so many national and binational couples in it.
Thank you very much. So next we'll go on to a question from Adrian Favel, who is asking, or first who compliments the book as a major systematic step forward in the sociology of the EU, and who asks if you could comment on to what extent or how the cross-national relations are gendered. There might be different hypotheses. According to traditional migration patterns, women might be more likely to move to be with a more established partner, or do women tend to stay more at home, closer to family? Alternately, Eurostars and Eurocities found several examples of international career mobility among highly educated women that was clearly gendered. Are there distinct north, south, west, east gendered patterns, as is sometimes speculated, and how do these issues intersect with class factors? That's one question. And then we have another one from Leah Comerma Caletude, sorry if I'm not getting your name correctly, who's asking if you have any insight on the effect of the pandemic, for instance, travel restrictions and lockdowns, if they've had any effect on the transnational couples. And then we also have a question from Kate Herrick, who's asking about the factor of European history of wars between nations and how this relates to post-war relationships. So maybe we'll start with those three, and if we have time, we can do another round.
Okay, Adrian's question is complex to answer, but I'll try to narrow it down to a couple of facts that perhaps answer at least partially this question. Indeed, I observed in the course of analyzing the data that there are some gendered patterns. One of them clearly confirms something like that he says in his own book, in Eurostars and Eurocities, which is that usually binational couples settle in the male partner's country. That's something I found strong evidence for by looking at the distribution of national partners and binational partners. So that fact confirms his own finding. Then, indeed, in terms of career mobility, one of the most surprising findings is that female foreign partners in these couples do not face disadvantages, or at least statistically significant disadvantages in the labor market when compared to women of similar education, similar background in national couples. The only contrast that was statistically significant in my sample was that male foreign partners from poor European countries, that is in lower class binational couples for the most, face certain challenges in the labor market compared to male nationals in national couples. They usually have higher rates of unemployment. They also are less likely to be represented in managerial position in economic organizations. And at the same time, they display significantly lower incomes than national male partners. I mean, the literature would have suggested otherwise. It would have suggested that it would be the women who would face greater hurdles. Perhaps my finding has to do with the fact that the type of couples that I'm analyzing, the move is not forced by necessity. That is, the women and the men who move to another country do so simply because they've married someone from that other country. Whereas in migration patterns is usually economic necessity that underlies that mobility. That would explain that in studies of mobility of migrants, women are at a greater disadvantage than men, whereas in my study, it's foreign male partners who have the toughest deal in the move. Also remember that they are a minority, so clearly the outcome of the move reinforces this idea that binational couples should settle in the male partner's country, because otherwise the risk is greater. But I mean, those are the only significant gendered patterns that I observe in my data. I always looked at interactions in many of the relationships that I analyzed, and those were the only ones that really were important. To the question of the pandemic, of course, the pandemic has stopped mobility across Europe, and one would suspect that in the last year there's been many fewer binational marriages or cohabiting arrangements taking place than in the past. But I think this is only a transitional phase, and that once the pandemic is over, that mobility will resume, and also in the course of time also international marriage. As for the impact of war between nations on post-war development, I think my book really doesn't speak to this issue. The only thing that is interesting, and perhaps speaks a little bit to your question, is that when one analyzes the binational, the composition of these binational couples, we discover that in the end, while they are transnational, very often they are not necessarily transcultural. For instance, when one analyzes binational couples in Zurich, well, the majority of them are between Germans and Swiss Germans. When we look at marriages, binational marriages in Belgium, very often it's Dutch-Belgian international marriages and so on. So basically, the highest propensity of these binational couples take place between individuals who are not far apart, either geographically or culturally. So perhaps, it would be interesting indeed to look at the composition and see whether align well with the different forces confronted each other during World War II, where there are lots of German-French binational couples, things like this, which they are actually, or German-Dutch binational couples, which they also are. But that would be a way of testing whether World War II had any impact on that. I doubt it, frankly. I doubt that it has left much of a trace in the composition of these marriages.
Thank you very much. All right, so we have a time for another round, I think. So I first will, Senia Rodinova is asking if same gender couples were included in the study. That's just a quick question. And then we have another question from Julie Perot, who's asking if binational couples do not result in an immediately more cosmopolitan society, does it nevertheless create stronger links between national countries the couples are from? And we have another question from Levin Schmidt, who's asking whether if there is a time a time lag in sort of the integration processes driven by binational couples. For instance, from their offspring, how the children are how their political cosmopolitanism is in the offspring. And we also have another question by Patricia Garcia Duran, who's asking about the surge of secessionism in Catalonia and how this relates to the perspectives in your thesis, if there's been a reduction of binational couples in Barcelona or something like this. So I guess we can start with those and from there.
Our samples didn't discriminate toward same-sex couples, and actually are I think at least in two of the I think in Belgium they didn't differentiate between same gendered and opposite gender couples in the sample, but in the end we ended up with about 32 such couples for the entire sample. And because of that, we excluded them from the analysis. Basically, there was very little that one could do statistically with only 32 such couples. I think it has to do in part, as I say, I think that by design, the way we were able to obtain registered data in order to sample households and then interview individuals in these couples, it was very difficult in Spain and in Switzerland, I think, and to really do it in such a way that we would capture more of those couples. Only in Belgium they were able to do so, and again the number was very small. So but it is indeed the case that it would be worth to pursue this study also with same-gendered couples. Binational couples and links between countries. I have here. I mean, we didn't explore the issue about what partners in binational couples think, or what views or images they have of their partners' countries. We didn't ask about that. The only thing we asked about tasting cuisine, and we found that indeed there is a clear relationship between marriage with someone from another country and liking that country's cuisine. That's as much as we could go in terms of measuring whether by being in a binational couple increases affinity towards that country. Yeah, I mean, we didn't explore that issue. As far as the time lag and the impact on offspring, I mean, that's a question that calls for a new book, and it's not in the cards that we'll conduct that study, but I think the natural follow-up to my study would be a study of the second generation of these couples. In the preliminary analysis that I was able to conduct by focusing on the parents of the partners in these couples, what I noticed and I thought was very interesting is that those individuals whose parents were binational tended to have a lower national consciousness than did the offspring of parents who were not binational. These with our own data, but that was not the intention of our data, of our analysis. So I'm not sure whether my findings are representative. But it was interesting to see that while the members of these binational couples do not lose their national identification, it remains as strong as it is in national couples, children of binational couples tend to display a greater, a weaker national identification than offspring of parents of the same nationality. It would be, if looking at it from a Markov chain perspective to see how this accumulates over time, it would be interesting to see what effect that has on the long run on denationalization and Europeanization processes. But I think as I say, I think this calls for a new and very interesting book. There's not such a thing. There's not such a book yet. I know a very nice qualitative study conducted by Varro on the offspring of binational couples, but it would be great to have someone conduct a study of children of binational couples to see whether the process continues or does not continue and under what conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. And then regarding the secessionism in Catalonia, did you have a comment on that?
I didn't understand. I mean, it's an interesting idea. If I could bring my two strands of research into one, it would be nice, but I do not see how secessionist tendencies will affect intermarriage in Catalonia. I think Barcelona remains an extremely attractive city for foreign Europeans, and that lots of friendships and marriages and couples emerge from this contact. I don't think that people will care much whether there is secessionism or not, but perhaps I didn't understand the question.
I don't know if Patricia is still in the room and she wants to share more, but otherwise we can follow up offline via emails and this kind of thing, especially with some of these other questions as well. I don't think we have time for another round of questions, but I can pass along any questions that we didn't get to over to you, and we can arrange potentially more follow-up as we like. And before leaving you, I would like to first thank all of the audience members for joining us today, and also thank both Céline and Juan for taking part in this discussion. And before, I'd also like to announce that the next Globe webinar will take place on March 11th, and this one will be with Augusto Lopez Carlos on his new book, Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century. And we also have a wonderful spring lineup featuring David Cohen, Tom Pegram, Julia Kreinkamp, and Genevieve LeBaron, all the way through June. So you can check out this entire lineup online at globe-project.eu. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you all again soon at one of our next webinars. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.